I'm here with Anat Ben-David, who is a senior lecturer and head of the Open Media and Information Lab at the Open University of Israel. And Anat has very kindly agreed to answer to some questions about her current research on digital surveillance and COVID-19 that is part of the topic of digital surveillance today in my module, Media and Social Change at Loughborough University. So the first question that I'd like to ask, so in your research, you highlighted some of the problems of responses from governments to COVID-19 that are based on data surveillance and digital surveillance. What are the main risks in your opinion?
So in our research, we raise concerns about a data essentialist approach to digital tracking, promoted as the only means to effectively stop the spread of the virus. And while contact tracing is considered a necessary measure to undertake to stop the spread of the epidemic, we're mostly concerned with the long-term effects of slipping in security and cyber espionage surveillance techniques as a means to solve a civic public health issue. Instilling these measures through emergency acts and subsequently by primary legislation entails that digital surveillance is here to stay, even after the current health crisis. It also entails a securitization of society, using surveillance tools designed for tracking terrorists or innocent citizens might also have long-term effects on civic rights. And what is at stake here is not only the deterioration of the right to privacy, but also a considerable damage to public knowledge and public debate in democratic societies. If surveillance is promoted as the only means to address the problem, but no alternatives are considered, the voice of public health experts is not heard, and there is no data proving that these extreme measures are indeed effective and necessary, then there is also limited ability to debate the essentialist claims. The public is expected to welcome this type of solutionism as a protective measure in the same way that the security issues are respected. But again, this is not a security problem, but a civic one. The securitization of surveillance also entails that the data, practices, and techniques remain secret and therefore undebatable.
Thank you very much. And so, in particular, in your research, you have focused on the case of Israel. So, what do you think that the case that you examined can tell us about this issue?
Israel is the only democratic state that chose to enforce involuntary security forces surveillance on its citizens as a means to stop the spread of the virus and enforce social distancing and quarantine orders. It was able to do so under the country's permanent state of exception that allows the government to pass emergency acts while bypassing the parliament. This, of course, is exceptional compared to other Western democracies. But despite this exceptionalism, I think there are some lessons to be learned from the local case that may project on other countries and also globally. First, such surveillance appears to be inherent to the operation of modern technology and infrastructural surveillance, where private companies and government compete on the same grounds. Under contact tracing, the presentation of these forms of digital surveillance extend beyond questions of political choice or business model. Rather, they become a point of departure in the debate. So the statement is, we are already being traced, we should at least use it for good. The Apple-Google contact tracing app is a case in point. It allows us asking questions such as who holds the right and who is capable to provide technological solutions and under which terms, and how are government, private companies, how these decision-making processes take place when there are also commercial interests at stake. What types of solutions are privileged because they are simply possible from a technological point of view, even though they may not be the necessary or only solutions to solve a problem. We're already witnessing the infamous cyber espionage company NSO pitching a modified version of its tracking software to governments. Are these the companies governments should entrust their sensitive data with to perform contact tracing? And then there's a question of trust and the politics of command and control versus the politics of care. Would digital tracing be the only option in countries that address the problem through the lens of the politics of care? I'm not really convinced.
So thank you. Let's imagine that like I am one like a citizen, or even one of my students who's concerned, rightly so, like everybody, about the present situation, and maybe ask you. So in this current situation, as bad as it is, are these issues not secondary to the primary need of tackling the epidemic? In other words, should not all means, including so this that you mentioned, be undertaken in order to fight the virus?
So I'm not completely overruling the technological solutions and the contact tracing technologies to address an imminent public health problem. The question is more essentially how decision-making processes work and how they take place. Are we deciding on solutions based on the open, transparent, debatable data, or is it a very concentrated, I should also say almost authoritarian way of enforcing command and control techniques on a civic problem? When we look at the public health experts and the opinions that they issue to the Parliament and to the Supreme Court on the issue, they essentially argue that contact tracing technologies are not the way to address the problem. They argue instead that the state should increase the number of testing, for example, and increase the number of personnel who is doing the manual epidemiological trace of each individual patient. Their voice is not being heard. Instead, the only claim that we hear is that security forces surveillance is the only way to solve the problem, and there are no other alternatives. So lacking data to debate this essentialist claim on one hand and to evaluate the experts' opinions on the other leaves us actually in a void where we can't evaluate the solutions that have been chosen with regards to other alternatives.
Thank you. I think this is a very convincing question. So really, thank you so much for your time. Also, so from my students will be benefiting from this.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.